The old leather-bound manuscript crackled as it was opened, its yellowed pages releasing the musty scent of centuries past. Within these weathered sheets lay observations that would challenge everything modern minds believed about power, strategy, and the nature of human ambition. The document bore no author's name, yet its insights carried the unmistakable weight of Niccolò Machiavelli's revolutionary thinking, thoughts that had been deemed too dangerous for his own time, yet remained startlingly relevant in an age of digital warfare and corporate manipulation. What follows is not merely historical analysis, but a cognitive awakening. These words were written not to comfort, but to sharpen the mind like a blade against a whetstone. They reveal the hidden mechanisms that govern human behavior, the invisible strings that puppet masters have pulled for centuries, and the patterns that repeat endlessly across time and culture. To truly understand these principles is to see the world with eyes unclouded by wishful thinking or romantic idealism. The theater of power, where illusion becomes reality, power, in its truest form, operates not through force alone but through the careful manipulation of perception. The most successful leaders throughout history have understood that reality matters less than the appearance of reality, that truth is often less powerful than a well-crafted lie that serves a greater purpose. This fundamental insight cuts to the heart of human psychology and reveals why certain individuals consistently rise to positions of influence while others, despite superior intelligence or moral character, remain relegated to the margins of society. Consider the modern corporate executive who presents quarterly results to shareholders. The numbers themselves tell only part of the story. The executive's confidence, their ability to frame setbacks as temporary challenges, their skill in redirecting attention toward future opportunities, these elements often prove more decisive than the raw data. The shareholders, despite their supposed sophistication, respond not merely to facts but to the emotional resonance of the presentation. They invest not just in companies, but in stories, in visions, in the compelling narrative of inevitable success. This same principle applies across all domains of human interaction. The politician who wins elections understands that voters rarely choose based on policy positions alone. Instead, they select candidates who make them feel heard, understood, and hopeful about the future. The successful romantic partner creates an atmosphere of excitement and possibility, understanding that love often blooms in the soil of mystery and aspiration rather than complete transparency. The effective teacher captivates students not merely through subject matter expertise but through the ability to make learning feel like discovery, to transform obligation into curiosity. The key insight here is that human beings are fundamentally emotional creatures who post-rationalize their feelings with logical explanations. We tell ourselves we make decisions based on careful analysis, but, in reality, we first experience an emotional response and, then, construct intellectual justifications for that response. The master strategist recognizes this truth and crafts their approach accordingly, speaking first to the heart and then to the mind. This does not mean that competence is irrelevant or that substance can be entirely replaced with style. Rather, it means that competence without the ability to communicate it effectively remains largely powerless. The brilliant scientist whose discoveries gather dust because they cannot articulate their significance to funding committees has failed not in their research but in their understanding of human nature. The innovative entrepreneur whose superior product fails in the marketplace because they cannot tell a compelling story about its value has misunderstood the fundamental dynamics of commerce. The manipulation of perception extends beyond individual interactions to the shaping of entire cultural narratives. Those who control the dominant stories of a society, whether through media ownership, educational curricula, or cultural production, wield influence that extends far beyond their immediate sphere. They do not merely report reality, they actively construct it by determining which events receive attention, how those events are framed, and what conclusions audiences are encouraged to draw. In the digital age, this power has become democratized in some ways and more concentrated in others. Social media platforms allow ordinary individuals to shape narratives and build followings, yet the algorithms that determine which content receives visibility remain controlled by a small number of technology companies. The result is a paradox: unprecedented opportunities for individual expression coupled with unprecedented potential for manipulation by those who understand how to game the system. The wise observer recognizes that every piece of information they encounter has been filtered through multiple layers of human bias and strategic intent. The news article has been written by a journalist with particular ideological leanings, edited by managers with commercial pressures, and distributed through platforms with their own algorithmic priorities. The academic study has been conducted by researchers with career incentives, funded by organizations with specific agendas, and published in journals with editorial preferences. Even seemingly objective data points, stock prices, unemployment figures, polling results reflect the methodological choices and interpretive frameworks of those who collect and present them. This understanding should not lead to cynical paralysis or the abandonment of all attempts at truth-seeking. Instead, it should cultivate what might be called strategic awareness, the ability to simultaneously engage with information while maintaining consciousness of the motivational structures that produced it. The strategically aware individual asks not just is this true, but who benefits from my believing this is true, and what am I not being told? The cultivation of this awareness requires constant practice and a willingness to question comfortable assumptions. It means developing the intellectual courage to consider possibilities that contradict one's existing beliefs, while maintaining the emotional resilience to function effectively despite recognizing the pervasive nature of deception and manipulation in human affairs. It means learning to navigate a world where sincerity and calculation often intertwine, where the most effective leaders may genuinely believe their own propaganda, and where the line between performance and authenticity frequently blurs beyond recognition. Those who master this understanding gain what could be termed reality advantage, the ability to perceive situations more accurately than their competitors and to respond more effectively to the true dynamics at play. They become less susceptible to manipulation while simultaneously more capable of ethical influence. They can build authentic relationships while understanding the strategic dimensions of social interaction. They can pursue genuine goals while recognizing that the path to those goals often requires tactical flexibility and political sophistication. This is not about becoming manipulative oneself, but about developing immunity to manipulation while maintaining the ability to operate effectively in a world where power dynamics are omnipresent. It is about learning to see the game being played without losing one's moral compass, to understand strategy without becoming purely strategic, to recognize calculation without becoming coldly calculating. The architecture of influence, building empires of the mind. True influence operates not through commands or coercion but through the subtle reshaping of how others think about their options and desires. The master of influence understands that people must feel they are making free choices, even when those choices have been carefully constrained by the environmental conditions the influencer has created. This insight reveals why some individuals can inspire fierce loyalty and dedication while others, despite holding formal authority, struggle to generate genuine commitment from their followers. The construction of influential power begins with the recognition that all human beings seek to feel important, understood, and part of something larger than themselves. These fundamental psychological needs create opportunities for those perceptive enough to recognize and address them. The skilled leader does not merely issue directives, they create contexts in which following those directives feels like an expression of the follower's own values and aspirations. Consider how revolutionary movements gain momentum. The successful revolutionary leader does not simply proclaim their vision, they help potential followers recognize that the current system denies them dignity, opportunity, or security. They make visible the gap between what exists and what could be, then position themselves as the bridge across that gap. They transform individual grievances into collective purpose, personal frustrations into shared mission. The followers do not feel manipulated, they feel awakened to possibilities they had not previously seen. This same dynamic operates in commercial contexts, where the most successful businesses understand they are not merely selling products but fulfilling deeper psychological needs. Apple does not sell phones, it sells membership in a tribe of creative, forward-thinking individuals. Nike does not sell shoes, it sells participation in a culture of athletic achievement and personal transcendence. These companies have mastered the art of making consumption feel like self-expression, of transforming transactions into identity statements. The key to this approach lies in understanding that people rarely want what they think they want. They want the feelings that they believe certain things will provide: security, status, belonging, excitement, meaning. The skilled influencer learns to identify these underlying desires and to position their offerings as pathways to their fulfillment. They do not argue with surface objections, they address the emotional logic that drives decision-making. This requires developing what might be called emotional cartography, the ability to map the psychological landscape of another person's inner world. The effective influencer learns to read subtle cues, the brief hesitation that reveals uncertainty, the defensive posture that signals insecurity, the quickened speech that indicates excitement, the wandering attention that suggests disengagement. They develop sensitivity to the fears and aspirations that drive behavior, the stories people tell themselves about who they are and who they want to become. Armed with this understanding, the influencer can frame their proposals in terms that resonate with the other person's existing motivational structure. They can present challenges as opportunities for growth, obstacles as chances to demonstrate competence, sacrifices as investments in future success. They help others see how their proposed course of action aligns with values and goals that the other person already holds. This process requires patience and subtlety. Direct confrontation of existing beliefs typically triggers defensive responses and strengthens resistance. Instead, the wise influencer plants seeds of new thinking and allows them to germinate naturally. They ask questions that lead others toward desired conclusions rather than stating those conclusions directly. They share stories and examples that illustrate principles without explicitly articulating those principles. They create experiences that generate emotions which then shape subsequent reasoning. The master of influence also understands the power of constraint and scarcity. By limiting options or creating deadlines, they can accelerate decision-making and increase the perceived value of their offerings. However, this must be done authentically. Artificial scarcity is often detected and can damage credibility. The genuine influencer creates real value and, then, structures its availability in ways that encourage action. Social proof plays a crucial role in this architecture of influence. People look to others for guidance about appropriate behavior, especially in uncertain situations. The skilled influencer therefore cultivates visible examples of desired behaviors and outcomes. They create communities of practice where the desired mindset becomes normalized and reinforced. They generate momentum by starting with early adopters and then leveraging their enthusiasm to attract more cautious followers. The digital age has created new tools for influence while also making traditional techniques more transparent. Social media platforms provide unprecedented access to psychological data about potential targets, allowing for precisely calibrated messaging. At the same time, increased awareness of manipulation techniques has made audiences more skeptical and harder to influence through crude approaches. This has elevated the importance of authenticity and genuine value creation in influence attempts. The most effective modern influencers combine technological sophistication with timeless understanding of human psychology. They use data analytics to identify opportunities while relying on intuition and empathy to craft messages that truly resonate. They leverage digital platforms for reach while building genuine relationships that transcend virtual connections. They automate certain processes while maintaining personal attention to key relationships. The ethical dimension of influence cannot be ignored. The same techniques that can be used to inspire positive change can also be employed for selfish or destructive purposes. The responsible practitioner of influence therefore requires a strong moral foundation and clear principles about appropriate uses of their capabilities. They seek win-win outcomes where their success depends on others' genuine benefit. They build sustainable relationships rather than pursuing short-term gains that might damage long-term trust. This ethical approach often proves more effective than purely manipulative alternatives. People have intuitive sensitivity to others' intentions, and attempts at influence that are perceived as self-serving often backfire. Conversely, when people sense that an influencer genuinely cares about their well-being, they become more open to guidance and more willing to extend trust. The most powerful influence flows from authentic concern for others' success and happiness. The cultivation of influential capability therefore requires not just strategic thinking but also emotional intelligence, ethical development, and genuine care for others. It demands the ability to see situations from multiple perspectives, to understand complex motivational structures, and to craft approaches that honor both one's own goals and others' autonomy. It requires the wisdom to know when to influence and when to step back, when to persist and when to accept resistance. Those who master these principles find that their capacity for positive impact expands dramatically. They can build organizations that inspire dedication, create movements that generate lasting change, and develop relationships that enrich all parties involved. They become capable of what might be called multiplication leadership, the ability to help others become more capable, more motivated, and more successful, thereby expanding their own influence through the success of those they have influenced. The eternal game, mastering the rules that never change beneath the surface complexity of modern life, operate fundamental patterns that have remained constant throughout human history. These patterns reveal themselves in the rise and fall of empires, the dynamics of personal relationships, the cycles of economic boom and bust, and the eternal struggles for power and security that define the human condition. To recognize these patterns is to gain access to a form of wisdom that transcends specific contexts and provides guidance across all domains of life. The first and most crucial of these eternal patterns is the cycle of creation and destruction that governs all human endeavors. Every organization, relationship, and social system contains within it the seeds of its own eventual demise. Success breeds complacency, power generates corruption, prosperity leads to decadence. What takes generations to build can be destroyed in moments through pride, neglect, or failure to adapt to changing circumstances. Yet from this destruction emerges opportunity for renewal, for fresh thinking, for innovative approaches that could not have emerged from within the constraints of the old system. Understanding this cycle enables strategic thinking that spans multiple time horizons. The wise leader recognizes that current success is temporary and uses periods of strength to prepare for future challenges. They invest in capabilities, relationships, and resources that will prove valuable when circumstances shift. They cultivate humility that prevents the overconfidence that destroys so many who achieve early success. They develop resilience and adaptability rather than becoming overly dependent on specific strategies or advantages. The second eternal pattern involves the tension between individual and collective interests. Every person exists simultaneously as an autonomous agent pursuing their own goals and as a member of various groups whose success depends on coordination and cooperation. This dual nature creates permanent tensions that must be carefully managed. Pure individualism leads to isolation and vulnerability, pure collectivism leads to stagnation and tyranny. The optimal approach involves dynamic balancing that shifts based on circumstances while maintaining awareness of both levels of interest. This pattern manifests differently across cultures and historical periods, but its fundamental structure remains constant. The successful society creates institutions that align individual incentives with collective welfare, but these institutions require constant maintenance and periodic renewal. The effective leader helps others see how their personal success connects to group success, while also ensuring that group goals do not completely subsume individual aspirations and creativity. The third pattern concerns the relationship between knowledge and power. Information has always been a source of advantage, but the nature of valuable knowledge shifts over time. In agricultural societies, knowledge of seasons and soil provided power. In industrial societies, understanding of machinery and production processes became crucial. In information societies, the ability to process and synthesize data creates competitive advantage. Yet across all these transitions, the fundamental principle remains: those who can see patterns that others miss, who can anticipate changes before they become obvious, who can synthesize insights from multiple domains, gain strategic advantage over those who operate with more limited perspectives. The modern challenge involves dealing with information abundance rather than information scarcity. The strategic advantage now lies not in accessing information, most information is freely available, but in developing the judgment to distinguish valuable insights from noise, the wisdom to synthesize complex data into actionable understanding, and the courage to act on that understanding even when it contradicts conventional wisdom. This requires cultivating what might be called meta-learning, the ability to learn how to learn more effectively. It involves developing pattern recognition capabilities that operate across different domains, understanding how insights from one field might apply to challenges in another field. It means building mental models that can accommodate complexity and uncertainty while still providing guidance for action. The fourth eternal pattern involves the dynamics of trust and betrayal that underlie all social relationships. Trust enables cooperation and creates possibilities for mutual benefit that would be impossible in its absence. Yet trust also creates vulnerability, and that vulnerability will inevitably be exploited by some individuals some of the time. This creates a permanent tension. Too little trust leads to isolation and missed opportunities, while too much trust leads to exploitation and disappointment. The resolution of this tension requires what might be called calibrated trust, the ability to extend appropriate levels of trust based on careful assessment of others' character, incentives, and capabilities. This involves understanding that trustworthiness is not a binary characteristic but a complex attribute that varies across different contexts and relationships. Someone might be completely reliable in professional contexts while being unreliable in personal relationships, or vice versa. Building trustworthiness in oneself requires consistency between words and actions over extended periods, transparency about limitations and uncertainties, and the courage to fulfill commitments even when doing so becomes inconvenient. It involves understanding that reputation is built slowly through many small actions but can be destroyed quickly through a single significant betrayal. The fifth pattern concerns the role of narrative and meaning in human motivation. People need stories that help them make sense of their experiences and provide direction for their efforts. These stories operate at multiple levels: personal narratives about individual identity and purpose, cultural narratives about group identity and values, and universal narratives about the nature of existence and humanity's place in the cosmos. Those who can craft compelling narratives that resonate with others' experiences and aspirations gain significant influence over behavior and decision-making. This does not necessarily involve deception. The most powerful narratives are those that help people recognize truths about themselves and their situations that they had not previously articulated clearly. The challenge in the modern era involves navigating competing narratives that offer different interpretations of the same events and different prescriptions for action. The mentally sharp individual develops the ability to step outside particular narratives and examine their assumptions, emotional appeals, and logical structures. They can appreciate the power of stories while maintaining awareness of their constructed nature. The sixth and final eternal pattern involves the relationship between order and chaos, structure and freedom, security and possibility. All successful systems require sufficient structure to function reliably, but too much structure leads to rigidity and inability to adapt to changing circumstances. All innovation requires some degree of freedom and experimentation, but too much freedom leads to chaos and inability to build upon previous achievements. The optimal approach involves what might be called dynamic stability, maintaining core principles and structures while allowing flexibility in their application. This requires understanding which elements of a system are essential and must be preserved, and which elements are contextual and can be modified without compromising fundamental integrity. Mastering these eternal patterns does not guarantee success in any particular endeavor, but it provides a foundation for thinking strategically about complex situations. It enables recognition of opportunities and threats before they become obvious to others. It supports the development of approaches that work with human nature rather than against it. Most importantly, it provides a sense of perspective that helps maintain psychological equilibrium during periods of uncertainty and change. Those who internalize these patterns find themselves operating with what might be called temporal advantage, the ability to think and act with awareness of how current events fit into larger historical cycles. They become less reactive to immediate circumstances while more responsive to underlying trends. They develop patience for long-term development while maintaining urgency about critical opportunities. They gain access to wisdom that has been accumulated over centuries while remaining flexible enough to adapt that wisdom to contemporary challenges. This is the true sharpening of the mind that Machiavelli's insights provide, not just tactical knowledge about power and influence, but strategic understanding of the fundamental patterns that govern human affairs. It is wisdom that enables effectiveness without requiring the abandonment of ethics, power that serves purposes larger than self-aggrandizement, intelligence that creates value for others while advancing one's own legitimate interests. The individual who masters these principles becomes capable of what might be termed principled pragmatism, the ability to achieve practical results while maintaining integrity, to work within existing systems while gradually improving them, to exercise influence responsibly while building rather than destroying the social fabric upon which all human flourishing depends. This is perhaps the highest achievement of strategic thinking, the capacity to play the eternal game skillfully while contributing to outcomes that benefit not just oneself but the larger human community of which one is inevitably a part. The manuscript closes with the weight of centuries, its insights as sharp today as they were when first conceived. These words offer no easy comfort, no simple formulas for success, but rather the difficult gift of clarity about the world as it truly operates. To absorb these lessons fully requires courage, the courage to see clearly, to think independently, and to act with both wisdom and integrity in a world that often rewards neither. Yet for those who possess such courage, the rewards extend far beyond personal advantage to encompass the possibility of contributing meaningfully to the great human project of creating order, beauty, and justice in an inherently chaotic universe.